Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'll be reviewing the 1987 American horror film cult classic, The Stepfather. Now, this was a film that was released in January of 1987 and didn't do too well at the box office, but did receive some positive critical reception and then ultimately slowly became a cult classic that allowed for 2 more sequels and then ultimately a 2009 remake of the same name to be released. So this became something of a franchise despite its initial failure at the box office. Now, The Stepfather is a film that stars Terry O'Quinn in the role of the stepfather. Now, he's someone that we don't really know his actual name. He continues to assume new identities as he moves from family to family in the suburbs of the Pacific Northwest. So here he is in a suburb outside of Seattle, Washington. At the very beginning of the film, we see he has killed his entire family, and then he finds a new family to become the stepfather of, and that kind of sets things up already, right? We already have the disturbing reality of the danger that he poses already in our faces, and so it really does help to ratchet up the tension consistently throughout the narrative. It kind of gives us information that these characters do not have, and despite the daughter being very suspicious, she doesn't really have the full picture, while we do, and of course the mother is falling in love with this man. So it's really a very good, disturbing premise to have for a horror movie, and it's definitely a unique sort of way to explore the slasher tropes. Now, this is a film that doesn't necessarily fall into all those slasher tropes, but they did try and market it in that way because they thought that that was something that would allow it to have success at the box office. Of course, this didn't work, but it does kind of fit within that some of those sort of ideas a little bit, though it does subvert a lot of them, and it's really almost more like this sort of psychological thriller horror movie than necessarily a pure sort of slasher. Now, we really get a great performance from Terry O'Quinn in the role of, well, he sort of goes by a bunch of different things, right? He now uses the name Jerry Blake, and he marries a widow named Susan Main, and they're, like I said, living in a suburb of Seattle, and he sort of slowly becomes ingratiated within this community. He's working as a real estate agent, and he really makes connections with everyone in the neighborhood and with the people that he sold houses to and within his sort of workplace. So that's really a really interesting thing that goes on in this movie, is that instead of it just being danger from the outside coming into the suburbs, which are supposed to be peaceful and sort of away from the scary city, this is a film that really takes one of the sort of archetypes of suburban sort of television life, of the sort of television sitcoms, the sort of patriarch of the family, and it turns that sort of archetype into a disturbing serial killer, and it looks at it from a really interesting angle. So there's a lot of sort of social commentary that can, of course, be present, and it's sort of, in a way, a critique of Reagan America, right? This was in 1987, and so it's definitely looking at the sort of underbelly, the darker underbelly of sort of some of the Leave It to Beaver style social conservatism and family values of that period. And while, of course, being an interesting film with sort of this infusion of social commentary to it, which makes it unique, in comparison to some of these other slasher movies in the angle that they're taking, sort of a suburban slasher movie, but at the same time, it's also just a really good movie that's really tense, and you really care about all the characters. The human drama is really drawn out in a very compelling way. The performances are really good. I think the daughter in this movie is really interesting. Stephanie Main, played by Jill Schoen, really gives a good performance as the daughter in this film, as she really is trying to come to terms not only with her father's death, but also the sort of, it's kind of hard to tell for sure how much she really is afraid of him versus how much of it is sort of the standard response to this sort of trauma of losing her father, and then the new anxieties of becoming a family with some new man entering the house and taking over the role that the person that you're still grieving sort of occupied. So they kind of play they play with that, and they have the therapist interacting with the daughter, and the therapist really does care about his job, and he's a competent professional, and that ends up getting him killed because he cares so much, and he's actually willing to listen to his patients. So I really like that. I like that this isn't just a bunch of dumb characters that are ignoring obvious signs. They are trying to sort of figure this out. Then you have, of course, the constant ratcheting up of the sort of closing in of the walls on our main character, on the stepfather, Jerry Blake, or Bill Hodgkins, or Henry Morrison, or whoever you want to call this character that Terry O'Quinn is playing. Sort of, you have the performance from Jim. He's the brother of the sister that was the previous wife of the stepfather. He is sort of that, he's the vehicle through which we see that there is sort of a timeline to this, that Terry O'Quinn's not going to continue to be able to get away with these murders, and that he has to kill this family and move on quickly, otherwise he'll be found out soon enough. And I think that that does help ratchet up the tension, and I think the murders that he's doing are ratcheting up the tension. I think there's some really well executed kill scenes. We really get these sort of extended fight and stalk and chase sequences, which slasher movies are always able to execute very well if they are a good slasher movie. But these ones feel almost even more personal because there's no mask. He's just completely becoming who he is. And I think that the way they sort of display, the way that the characterization for the stepfather, the fact that they don't go too far into his sort of split identity crisis. They don't like try and go into the tropes of like, oh my gosh, he's a really nice guy, but then something snaps and he becomes a bad guy. It's all part of this sort of personality that's taking on, and this idea of the fact that he is obsessed with television sitcoms and television sitcom families, in the sort of Leave It to Beaver perfect style family that he's really trying to emulate and create a facsimile of within all these families that he's going to, but none of them ever can live up to his perfect conception of what sort of the idealized American family in the suburbs is supposed to be. And he really does absorb the ideology of sort of the family man of America. And I think that makes this really disturbing, and it makes it very compelling as a narrative device, and I think it really works well, not only, as I said, for a social commentary of Reagan America, but also just as an effective horror movie, because we don't really get this angle to too many films. Usually it's like, oh my gosh, someone escaped from the sort of mental hospital and now he's going around killing off all these teenage girls. And that's not what we're getting here. What we're getting here allows for more compelling human drama, and it really did sort of hinge on a very good performance from Terry O'Quinn, and he absolutely delivers. He really does feel like a normal sort of guy, and then also when he's going crazy, he feels like a completely insane person that's very scary. But he's also kind of fun to watch as well, and there is a level of funness to this movie, despite the sort of dark subject matter, that also makes it a very watchable film. This isn't even, films that usually have subject matter like this, that are taking it from a more kind of real life horror approach as opposed to like a Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees type of situation. It almost kind of feels a bit too heavy, and it doesn't allow for the sort of fun that those other slasher movies can engage in. But I feel like Terry O'Quinn is really just giving such an amazing and just completely committed performance that's so much fun to watch. And I think that that is one of the elements that I was not necessarily expecting from this movie, but it nails that as well. My only really major critique I have of the movie is that sometimes I feel like it is just trying to sort of mark things off down a checklist of things you would expect in a 1980s horror movie or slasher movie, and I think that kind of takes away in certain moments. And I think one of the most egregious examples of this is towards the end of the movie when Stephanie, this girl that we have sort of been introduced to and we've really gotten to know as this really young girl who's just coming of age, she's having her sort of first love, and she's really a very innocent sort of girl that's clearly underage and all this kind of stuff, even though obviously the actress is an adult. But we have this sort of relationship with her as an audience, and then we go and have the completely gratuitous and unnecessary nudity scene that she has in the shower that doesn't lead to anything. She has the full shower, we see the full frontal nudity, everything, and then she gets out of the shower, and then it's like she's fully clothed by the time then that sort of the stalk and chase sequence happens and the fight scene happens at the end. So I think that was a completely unnecessary and just stupid addition that feels like you're trying to fall into the tropes of the genre rather than just telling a really compelling story. It just felt like it was completely out of place. And I think there was just a few other small moments like that that felt like you were trying more so to sort of pad, like the expectations of the kill count or whatever. And I think that that is a little bit disappointing, but also I think that there was so many other things that subverted sort of expectations and that made us really care about these characters, that those are just really small moments that don't detract too much for me. I think the sort of homage to The Shining, where this character that's been the whole time, right, Jim has been slowly tracking this guy down, and then he immediately just gets killed, but brings the gun, which is an important element. I think that that was fun as well, and I think there's just so much to this movie that works that the small little critiques I have are not really much to detract from it very much at all. And I would definitely recommend this to people who haven't seen it. I mean, this is my first time watching this movie. This is a movie I've heard about, but I've never actually tracked down and watched. And so I'm glad I went and actually watched the movie, and I really do think this is a cult classic for a reason. It's definitely become a horror film that I'm really amazed by how well executed it was. And I think the fact that you have someone like Donald Westlake who wrote the screenplay really helps to sort of add that sort of tension that you really don't always get as well executed as you do in this movie with some other slasher movies of the 1980s, especially around 1987 when the slasher cycle had already basically run its course and had already sort of done every trick in the book it knew how to do. And this one just feels like a really good grounded horror movie that dabbles in those elements, and I think that that makes it a really effective horror movie that I would definitely recommend to any horror fans out there. I know this film now has a bit of a legacy, like I said, as a cult classic, and there's been sequels and remakes. I've heard negative things about the remake, but I did hear some positive things about the sequel, so I'll have to go and track those down as well. This is definitely a horror film, like I said, that I recommend to horror fans for sure. If you haven't seen it yet, I think it's definitely one that is sort of not exactly what you would expect, but is a lot of fun and is a really compelling both drama and horror film. And it really makes us care about these characters, and a really great performance from Terry O'Quinn. Again, he is really a huge sort of strong point for this movie. It's a vehicle for him to really go crazy and be fully committed to a really fun role, and I think he gives a excellent performance in this film. So that's all I really have to say about The Stepfather. This is a horror movie that I really loved, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on what you think of The Stepfather. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you've seen, please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications every time I make a new video. So again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.